Yeah, my name is Angus, and we're talking today about deploying an accessible LLM-based conversational robot in a hospital. So, first off, what's an accessible voice assistant? So, the World Health Organization said that over 1 billion people in the world are living with some form of disability, and yeah, I can set a timer while cooking, and my hands are dirty, and I can, I live in Scotland, so when my room is cold, I can turn off my light without getting on my cozy blanket. But some people, it goes beyond just convenience. I was at a respite care facility where a person with MS was telling me that at first he started to lose mobility in one of his legs, and he had to walk with a stick. Then in the other leg, he had to transport around in a wheelchair. Sorry, this is my social battery going on. Then one of his arms, he started losing mobility in one of his arms, and he had to get a specialized wheelchair. And then he went to this respite care home, and they had tried experimenting with Amazon Alexa devices during COVID, and he could ask to turn off his light before going to bed without getting someone to come and do that. And he said it was the first time in like 20 years that he felt like he'd regained some of his independence. So these systems not perfect by any means, but yeah, they're not just convenient. For some people, they're really, really great for mental wellness and yeah, just day-to-day independence. It's quite a broad topic, so I will try and cut down to a more sort of smaller setting. We have a robot. It's the one outside that wasn't working fully, but it's in a hospital in Paris, and it's conversing with patients in a memory clinic. So patients typically come in with a friend or a family member. They spend a day often at the clinic with multiple appointments, and maybe they have 4 hours between the two appointments, and they can come and talk to the robot if they want. So it's part of the Spring project. It's an EU project at Heriot-Watt University. And there are three sort of core challenges that lead to this setting that I've done through my PhD and also on this project. So the first was lack of data. Voice accessibility is impossible if we have no data on what are the differences in sort of speech. And then these lead to two sort of challenges. One is clarification requests and multi-party dialogue, but I'll cover those in depth in a second. So first off, I collected a data set, so I got Amazon Alexa devices and made this research device when people learned to knit during COVID. I learned to solder and sat and stunk out the flat making these devices to capture interactions between people with dementia and the Amazon Alexa in their own home in a way that could be done sort of in a COVID-friendly manner, so we could quarantine the devices and stuff like that. This was run with 10 families in which one member had dementia, and yeah, captured the interactions between the members of the family and the Alexa device. So what did we find? Well, sometimes people pause longer than expected. That's never not awkward. I hate doing it. But when talking to Alexa, we found that people with dementia pause significantly more often and for longer durations than people without dementia. I will note that this is on a subset so far. There's a lot of work in processing and making sure this data doesn't contain personal information, for example. But this is really important when we're talking to, say, an Alexa device and you pause in the middle of your sentence. The ASR thinks that you finished your sentence, and this system will respond with some nonsense, I don't understand, or do something that you didn't ask because you were not finished your sentence. So this slide, the screens are a bit small, you don't need to read it, don't worry. We needed to have some data of incomplete questions or incomplete sentences. So over a couple of papers, we got current data sets and interrupted them in various ways, and this was we had some meaning representations which we also underspecified, and the green there, when we removed the word from the sentence, we had to remove the meaning of that word from the representation. In this case, it's a query to a knowledge graph. But if we had the question, what is the smallest mountain in? And someone paused, and the ASR only got this, the system only got this part of the sentence, a human would maybe predict, or they might respond with something like, in where? So in order to capture these human sort of clarifications, we crowdsourced using Amazon Mechanical Turk with a portion of that data set that, the one here with the chopped questions. So we got 3,000 human clarification requests, And I had a nice little LLM catcher, because it turns out Amazon Mechanical Turk users also use LLMs, and we can't evaluate LLMs on their own work. So we had some nice tricks to make sure, or at least really try and make sure that these 3,000 clarifications are from humans. And we did various experiments on both generating these incremental clarifications and also whether LLMs can parse these clarification exchanges, such as what's the smallest mountain in where, and then maybe Egypt, and then answering that question. So this is, I don't have time to go into all of the results of all the experiments, but in general, GPT-4 performed the best overall. I didn't try Google Gemini 1.5, I'm sorry. But of the ones we tried, but in the hospital setting, we cannot send patients' voices to an OpenAI server. So the best that we could deploy on our own server would be Llama 2 70 billion chat, but that requires a lot of compute power, which is not available in the hospital. So the best one out of the smaller ones that you can deploy yourself was Vicuna 13 billion version 1.5. So there we go. If you would like to do anything like this, then that is the best one that we tried so far. The other challenge was these patients come to the hospital and they often bring a friend or family member. And today's dialogue systems are made for one person to talk to one system. So you'll go up and you'll ask Amazon or Siri a question, and it's obvious who you're talking to the system, and when the system responds, it's responding to you. Whereas in this example here, we have 4 people. That is not clear. If someone talks, they may be talking to you, they may be talking to someone else, and when you respond, you may be talking to one person, the person on the right, the left, 2 people, the whole group, and sort of the system, a multi-party system, needs to make these decisions. So yeah, we've been collecting data of this in the hospital as well, so people will maybe say, do you want a coffee, to their friend says yes, they would tend to turn to the robot and say, where can I get that? And so the system needs to understand that it's not responding to these first utterances that are to each other, and it needs to understand the dialogue that did happen in order to understand where do we get that. Here are some examples, difficult to read, I'll not go through them all, but yes, we had a multi-party quiz with some students last year. And if you had 2 people doing a quiz with the robot, which is sort of entertainment is one of its functions, I should have mentioned that. They can also ask sort of directions and about the menu in the cafe, for example. And if someone said, oh, I think it's London. Yeah, London. Then they're asserting how sure they are of their answer. There's no agreement between the 2 people playing this quiz. So the host of the quiz, the robot in this case, sort of should not wait for the other person. However, if we use diarization and the first person said, I think it's London, and the second person said, yeah, London, in that case, the 2 people have agreed, and the host of the quiz should be, okay, that's your final answer, and we'll proceed with the quiz. So it matters who said what. And another sort of challenge is people don't necessarily always say what they want. So they might say, my husband needs the bathroom, and when the system is responding, it should respond and look at the person who is next to them, the husband in this case. It's not always responding to the person that said the utterance. And another sort of novel problem in multi-party conversations is someone might say, what time is my appointment? And the other person then says it's 10 a.m. The system should not respond unless 10 a.m. is incorrect, in which case it should respond. But yeah, it gets very complicated. And these are sort of challenges that we've been working on in the Spring project. So you might have seen this outside. We've tinkered with this since, but in general, we have gaze detection and ASR, including speaker diarization. We have lots of project partners, and that's actually other partners do those bits. And these feed into the conversational system that we've built. So it needs to decide, is Ari the addressee? So is the person talking to the robot? The robot's called Ari. In this particular case, we are using an LLM for that. So it gets the information from both the gaze detection and the ASR. It's maybe a bit overkill, but it performs fairly well. Then it decides whether it was a full utterance. This is, again, not always clear. Someone might say, this cupboard is red, and someone then might say, turn to the robot and say, is it? Is it, just by itself, is sounds like an incomplete utterance, but in the context of the dialogue, it's not incomplete. That person was finished what they were saying. So again, we're using an LLM. These two things happen in parallel. And if they're not finished their sentence, we use this sluice corpus that I discussed earlier with the human clarifications to generate a nice human-like clarification. However, if they are addressing the robot and it is a full utterance, we have the knowledge in the prompt. We use RAG and some safety guardrails, etc. for that with the LLM to the TTS. So there is a video of this working. I don't know if I have time. I might have time. It doesn't matter, actually. Don't worry about it. I don't know if the audio or anything will work, but yeah, you can scan this QR code, or it should be out there, or just, I don't know, message on something if you would like. And we've got this video up of Nancy and I, who's in the audience and was with the robot earlier, our great acting skills, talking to the robot. And if you do watch it, I think the main problem right now is latency. So that's the main issue with the robot. So if anyone has any ideas on how to solve that, please let us know. So thank you very much. I'd like to sort of have some time for questions. There's a long list of people at the bottom there. I was going to get all the pictures, but not everyone has pictures. But yeah, Nancy and Oliver are in the room, and I think Neeraj might be. Anyway, there's a bunch of us here, and yeah, you should come and say hello. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm well under time. Sorry.
We have plenty of time for questions. So who wants to dive deeper and kick it off?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
What's the feedback been on the robot from the 10 families who have been using it?
Okay. So, yeah, sorry. I thought I was going to be slow, so I've clearly rushed. The Alexa data set is separate from the hospital. So I gave, during COVID, I gave families the Alexa device. Yeah. So the patients in the hospital, there were two waves of experiments in the hospital. One was pre-LLM and one was post-LLM. The first wave, obviously, it can answer lots of questions and anything it was designed to do, but patients in the hospital can say anything. So with the LLM, the sort of main benefit is that they can say something like, oh, I'm stressed, can I have a breathing exercise? They can play these quizzes, actually very like your demo. These quizzes can be generated on the fly. It can ask random questions about anything, and it can respond. It can do general chit-chat and handle these out-of-domain responses. So the researchers in the hospital do usability and acceptability tests. I'm not an expert in that. There is a paper on this in the works, but they improved quite drastically with the introduction of the LLM. Yeah.
I can follow up on that. Like, how do you see the near-term future in terms of like what the experience should look like?
Yeah. I don't know. The main problem, I think, with the robot is even if it was functioning fully in there, it's a bit too loud. The patients have to be taken down to a room where they talk, where the diarization can work properly, because it needs to understand like who's saying what. And if there are 20 people in a room, it can hear that, and maybe the diarization is good enough to get that, but it won't not know that these people over here are talking about something completely different. They may be asking a question to their friend. I think I've seen a similar problem with the AR glasses to subtitle conversations. Maybe for people who are hard of hearing, they can subtitle conversations in a cafe, but it might subtitle a really loud person in the table next to you. So yeah, it's just that's the main challenge I would see. But there are others, and it's a research project. I think there's planning to maybe try and get a second research project, but it's currently coming to the end. But PAL Robotics, the people who created the robot, got some feedback on that robot. Patients surprisingly really liked it because the screen is high enough that they can read what was being said, even though, in my opinion, it's really creepy, but yeah. I probably shouldn't say that. But yeah, it's just a really tall robot instead of like, maybe a cuter robot, but patients really like that, and I think there are definitely things to be improved, and the companies involved have learned quite a lot, I think, from the project. So yeah, I think it's trying to get that research to be used in industry is useful, but yeah.
Yeah, it is really interesting because a hospital is such a specific environment, and it really kind of gives to reason how each use case is so different, and the kinds of things you experience in the environment is so critical to what the experience needs to be. The sound levels, the where people's mindsets are in a hospital,
Yes,
is so different than if they're just walking around and being a tourist.
One of the examples I skipped because I thought I was on overtime was the hallucination problem is quite major. So in a setting like a museum, or maybe here in Dynamic Earth, where children could come and talk in groups to the robot, it's maybe not as safety critical as a hospital. So there were LLMs have responded to certain questions like, can I drive after my appointment? One of them said, no, you can after 4 hours, and that was not information that we had provided it. It just said that. And then there was another one where it's told the person to fast before their appointment, also not in the information. It's just sort of learnt that that's generally true. And so a real patient with dementia could go hungry because this LLM has decided that from its world knowledge, the person should fast. In our experiments, there are researchers there that make sure this does not happen. But that's a very good point that you made.
Yeah, very interesting. I think we had a question over here.
Hi. I was wondering, you said that people with dementia tend to have longer pauses, and I can imagine that messes up the turn-taking. Are there more groups that you are aware of that have that same pattern of having longer pauses?
Yes, that's a great question. I've had a lot of people who are non-native English speakers said that they have the exact same problem with Alexa, because they'll be in the middle of their sentence, forget the translation, and pause, and then the exact same problem happens. Same in cars, if you're distracted, if like maybe someone walks out or something and you get distracted, and then you try and continue what you were saying, but it's already cut off and trying to do whatever you had half said. So yeah, there's definitely, I think by working on voice accessibility, you are improving things for groups of people who can really use the system, but the solutions are also making things naturally interactive for a variety of use cases. So it's generally a fun thing to work on.
Any more questions? Two more.
Okay, so we have already heard a few times in these talks that LLMs are not especially fast, generating the quizzes, waiting for it was another presentation. In the demo, the bot was speaking out of the time it was supposed to speak. So how does this impact the interaction with the patients?
Yeah, so using something like GPT-4, it's too slow. In order, especially if you're in that particular architecture with when you have to wait for 2 different calls, or like there's multiple calls, but 2, you have to some are required before the second one can go. It's way too slow. It's way too slow. But because in the hospital we have to use one of these smaller models, it's maybe not as performant, but it is much faster, and having it locally deployed is much faster. We're also trying sort of chain of thought, I think is the prompt engineering term, of like trying to get some of these things to be done in sequence with one sort of mega prompt, but then other things go wrong. So yeah, there are various things we're trying, but yes, the sort of smaller local models are fast enough that it's much faster. And yeah, there's a lot of research on sort of trying to make more distilled small models that are very specific to a task, which should hopefully be much faster for all these problems we have.
Just curious if I understand it right, but if you're like fine-tuning this to be sensitive to someone with dementia, would there be a kind of a content moderation aspect as well, in the sense that a dementia patient, they might ask things like, how do I escape from this hospital, or because they're maybe delusional, or the kind of general direction? Yeah,
so funnily enough, Nancy, who's sitting like almost directly behind you, is working on this with a group of students. They're creating a data set of lots of interesting questions that people could ask. I think some things like, where can I find the medication, for example, which it should not respond to. So yes, maybe a better person to ask, but yeah, especially in a healthcare setting, there are lots of questions that people could ask. and getting it to only answer, funnily enough, there's a safety workshop in a few weeks, which I found a nice wee trick where if you quote the information in the prompt to some made-up character, a made-up name, and then in the prompt you say, answer according to this name, then it does tend to answer using the information in the given prompt rather than its world knowledge more. It still is not perfect, but yeah, for example, I had some finance questions and it moves really, really quickly. I think one of the questions was something to do with, does Elon Musk own Twitter? And all the LLMs were like, no, absolutely not. Even though in the prompt, it said that he did, because it was some article from some analysis website. So yeah, by putting this as a quote from someone else, I guess like humans would, and say, answer according to this person, then that was one trick. But yeah, I don't know, it's an open problem, I think.
Yeah, that is a really interesting mix of that. What's in the prompt, what's in the LLM itself, and then sometimes companies might have another layer of their own data, right? And that tango. So like, for example, at GoDaddy, one of the things we put in our prompt is, do not only speak about GoDaddy products and services, but there would be a percentage of the time where it would, speak about something else or even recommend a competitor. And that's part of, I guess, the risk of, we have to, in some ways, it's almost like we have to come up with that percentage because it's never going to be perfect. So what is the level of risk we're willing to take? Is it 5%, 15%? And does it vary by topic? So that's a very interesting example and kind of finding that balance as we try to engineer prompts and, also what's in that black hole of world data.
True.
Yeah.
And in the hospital, the patients are quite nice. They're not like bad actors, whereas I guess in your case, you could have anyone coming onto that website and be like, tell me a poem that, reveals some company information, or I don't know, people do all sorts of things we see in the news, so must be fun.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
Well, thank you very much for your time and illustrating that for us.